James has worked on some of the most groundbreaking films, certainly to gamers. Huge fan of things that he's touched. I mean, probably 3 of the most indelible brands in film history, and certainly for gamers: the Matrix Trilogy, the Star Wars, and obviously V for Vendetta. I think we all love these movies. I speak for everyone in the room here, but and we're all very influenced by them. And I think that one of the things that we wanted to chat about was just sort of the power of storytelling, how these brands have made such an impact on fans, how they've made evangelists across the world. They've basically, the IP has grown far beyond where it's originally started. And I thought we'd sort of begin with The Matrix, which I think was such a groundbreaking film on so many levels. And if you wouldn't mind just chatting a little bit about sort of how you got involved in that.
Well, the first Matrix film was made in Australia, and it was made like lots of Hollywood movies get made because there was a tax break there. You can make a movie anywhere in the world if there's a tax break. So they came to Australia. I was living in Australia at the time. I'd done a bunch of films. I'd grown up in the Australian film industry there, and I just went in and interviewed with them, and I was the first assistant director at that stage on films, which is basically responsible for the overall organisation of the film. Like making sure all the actors are available, getting the film in front of the camera in an orderly fashion. So I went and interviewed with the Wachowskis at that point, and we started there. I went home, read the script, and put it down, and I said, I have no idea what this thing is about, basically. I sort of had an idea, yeah. But I remember they have a famous story about the Warner guys ringing them up and saying, we don't know what we got here, but we know it's cool. And so it went on from there, and then we became friendly over the course of that movie. I don't think anyone sort of really expected that movie to come out and be as groundbreaking as it was, except for those guys. I think they, just had like the vision. They knew what they had. And then subsequently, it spurred the second and the third movie. And it was during the second and the third movie that the game content came into it. And so I guess the sort of exciting and the original thing about that is I guess as a lot of people here would know, if you want to simultaneously release a film and do a game, like the prep that you have to do on the game is like 3 years before you ever get around to release. And so they had already put that in motion. And the other great thing about that was we shot some original content for the game. So when we were shooting the sets, we would piggyback scenes onto the sets that we were in, which were just shot exclusively for the game. And I guess one of the hardest parts of making those movies was getting those guys' attention, because all they wanted to do was play Halo all day long. That's where they were at. It was like Halo up the wazoo for forever. But it was fun. It was a good experience.
So, and were you involved in the content for the video game as well?
Yeah, so I was the assistant director on those subsequent films, which were the sequels, but then they would go on and do other stuff, and I would just stay behind and direct the actors in the in the game sequences, basically. And so that was fun. So there was a whole separate script for the game, mm-hmm. and within that script was all the game scenes, and so I would just direct them sometimes.
So they brought the package of the movie and the game idea. The IP was sort of already figured out from a video game standpoint?
Figured out all straight from those guys. They absolutely knew that they wanted to do a game. Then they approached Shiny pretty early on, probably round about, before the first Matrix ever got released. They started, putting it in the works, because they were like big gamers. Mm-hmm. They were right into it.
What about you? Big gamer?
Yeah, but it used to be bigger than I am now. At the moment, I've got a kid now. That sort of takes away valuable time, unfortunately. But yeah, of course.
I think we all know about that.
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
So, another film that was sort of a groundbreaking film in your career was the V for Vendetta movie, and in this one you actually were the director.
Yeah.
And sort of talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, after the second and third Matrix films, which I was involved with for a long time, like that whole process from the first one to the second and the third, that was probably like a 3 or 4 year process, something like that. And you stand around enough movie sets, you start to talk about what you might what if what would you go and do. And so we decided, those guys were totally sick of directing films at that point. They said, look, we had this 3 picture writing deal at Warner Brothers before we got started with the Matrix stuff. One of the films was V for Vendetta, one was this film called The Business, and the other one was Plastic Man, I think it was the other one. And they said, this was right around in the lead up to the Iraq War, I guess, around that sort of 2003 kind of time. And so we said, hey, this V for Vendetta, this graphic novel, it's still really, it's prescient. What about if we updated it and we'll approach the studio, see what we think. And so we went to the studio and they said, well, yeah, what, Matrix, how much money did that make? $1 billion. You want to make a movie about a terrorist? Sure, go right ahead, like knock yourselves out, What was it about again? It was a bit like that. So, which would never happen again, by the way. But yeah, so we did a rewrite on the script, and this time we went to Berlin because there was a tax break in Berlin, and I shot nearly the whole film there, except for like a couple of weeks in London, just for the exteriors and getting the flavour of London. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like a easy, simple thing, and if you told someone who was starting out in the film business, that's how you actually got to make a film. I've glossed over a few bits, but it was pretty straightforward, to tell you the truth. It was a great thing to do, and parts of the script at the time were like sort of writing themselves. I picked up the New York Times one day, read about extraordinary rendition, and I went, wow, this is crazy. What's happening? The CIA's like kidnapping people and putting a bag on their head and taking them to Egypt and torturing them, and we just put stuff like that in the script, and it was that whole you're either with us or you're against us kind of time of the Bush administration, and so we would just try and fold it all into the script, but the bones of it were completely there. Like the graphic novel that Alan Moore had written in the 80s during the Thatcherite period, was exactly the same, because all politic like that is completely circular, and so it just resonated, but it was resonating in a different country. So it sort of wrote itself in some ways.
One of the things that the conference is really about is creating brand evangelists, creating people who respond to genuine content that feels authentic, and empowering them to act on your behalf, to go out and share it and really make it part of their lives. It's not just a piece of entertainment they consume, it's how they identify with themselves. And this movie in particular has had an incredible social impact. And can you sort of speak to sort of how you've been engaged in that, and must be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, to the first part of your question, I think the original content part of it, I think it's a lot of it's about world creation. I think if you go back to the Star Wars stuff that I was involved in, like that's like a whole world that Lucas created. If you go to the Matrix, that's a whole world that they created. It's a complete world. And V for Vendetta, in some ways, is that. It's about the morality of terrorism. It's like, if you don't have a voice, how can you have a voice? And I think the thing that a lot of people responded to, especially going forward with V for Vendetta, and why it was adapted by people in like the Arab Spring, it was adapted by Anonymous, it was adapted by Occupy Wall Street, the Scientologists. It's all part of the same thing, but I think The Mask, gave people a voice, and it gave them a voice, and the thing that was like great about the way it got appropriated, I guess, was that people actually got the intent of the movie, which doesn't happen very often. I mean, people really responded to what that movie was about and how you could abstract it or put it into your social life, and how it can resonate. And when the film came out itself, like social media wasn't, as huge as it is now, but that that was the thing that really, you know, lit the fire of like The Mask, and that was social media, and that's why anyone that doesn't have does not have a voice, you can see them appropriate The Mask these days.
Yeah, I read something that said two things I thought were interesting. One is that the Mask has sort of surpassed the Che Guevara for the modern revolution,
Right.
modern revolutionary, and that the Mask instantly combines this sort of message of modern revolutionary with anonymity, and that ability is sort of that it unlocked that key for so many people.
Yeah.
Now, you guys put this movie out, and I mean, it's a piece of entertainment you were making.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you saying when this starts to happen? I mean, it didn't happen immediately, right? There was there
was a lag. I mean, there was a sort of a lag with the movie. I mean, the movie came out and, you know, did well and made a bunch of money and all that, but
everyone was happy.
Everyone was happy. Everyone was happy. But its social impact was, you know, like 3 years later, I think, you know, maybe 4 years later, and the amount of people that, like, you know, stop you and go, oh, you know, I really enjoyed your film, that also happened later too. You know, it sort of seemed like its life, you know, started a long time after the movie, and you know, you hope, you know, when you make something, there's like so much noise, you know, whether you're making a film or you're making a game, that you can somehow impact culturally, you know, like that would be like the best thing that you could do. And to see the film and The Mask and, you know, our work and Alan Moore's work actually be out there every day, like in the fabric of society, is like, you know, it's fantastic. It's pretty great, you know, and the fact that, you know, it's being sort of used in the way that it was used in the film is also great. It's not like being at a Republican convention and they play a Bruce Springsteen song, and the next thing you cut to Bruce Springsteen's like, oh, how dare you use my song? You know, it's like the thing with V for Vendetta is they totally got it. You know, they totally got the use of The Mask and, you know, what we were trying to say. Like, the graphic novel is maybe more about the individual, but we very specifically made the film more about, you know, the mass. You know, it was about why at the end of the film everyone started taking off the mask, because it was like, you can, you know, everyone can, you know, participate in this revolution.
Basically have a room full of marketers on the video game side of things, and, you know, they look at those examples and they say, how can I have that kind of engagement? Now, I know there's lightning in a bottle sometimes, but you know, are there things that we can infer from this? So we look at the Matrix, obviously, but V for Vendetta is, I think, even more powerful on so many levels, because it created movements, unintentionally even. Yeah. And are there lessons from that you look at when you look at your future work, the work you're working on now, lessons for our audience here of how do we capture our audience and make them really care about our brand? How do we give them tools to use this?
You know, a lot of a big part of it, and I think if you ask anyone who's in the creative arts, I think, is they'll always probably say, be true unto yourself. You know, I mean, I think you absolutely have to have an interest in doing something. It's like impossible to do, I think, it's impossible to do something just as a purely fiscal kind of like adventure, you know, because there always seems to be some sort of hole in it. But I think if you, first of all, go for the whole creative side of it, the whole creative world of it, and then the rest will usually follow. You know, like if you're in step with, you know, what is happening out there culturally, and you're following it, and that in turn falls in step to what you want to do. I mean, I think that's the best way. I mean, and I think, you know, like the thing about the Matrix was it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. The thing about Star Wars, it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that V for Vendetta was like the film was groundbreaking, but if you go back to the original source material, the way that Alan Moore, the writer, was able to, you know, fuse politics and sciences and philosophy and the arts and that, I mean, I think he world created as well, you know, and then I took that and did the same thing. So I think it's about, you know, creating a world, and hopefully the lightning in the bottle follows you at the same time.
Did the studio on V, did they did they have social, I mean, I know it was the social machine that exists today really wasn't in place.
Yeah.
How did the studio and or yourself or the Wachowskis, I mean, was there, as you saw this happening, was there something you wanted to do with it to help push the message or keep the fans alive? Was anything being created to feed the content, or did it become self-propagating on some level?
It became self-propagating on some level because it was about appropriating the mask. But, you know, like if you have a machine like, you know, Warner Brothers behind you, I mean, like those guys, you know, are pushing the films out the door, you know, every week. And so, and they really know how to do it. And Warner Brothers is like one of the, you know, Fox is probably a really great one, but Warner Brothers is like the other really good marketers out there. But I think that back then, a campaign that they'd started with the Matrix is, and it was one of the first sort of social media campaigns, it was called What is the Matrix? And that was really successful. And then we came a couple of years after that. And so they sort of had the whole social media, you know, like the game stuff was already going. So they had a lot of that in place, but the majority of it that happened, especially with V for Vendetta, came after. You know, it sort of came after. So, you know, I wish I got some money for the mask, but
yeah. Well, Warner Brothers gets money.
Warner Brothers
they
gets
make
plenty.
They make off every mask I heard. So, I mean, there's something about that iconography. I wonder if that's something, do you find yourself looking at other projects and going, you know, if you can just create that singular icon that can exist beyond and represent on such a simple, I mean, we see it in video games sometimes. We see a mark in the logo or in the game or on a uniform that becomes, you know, even in the last panel, Linda from SOE, she had her Terran Republic mark, and I mean, that's what she exists, you know, that's something she rallies behind. I mean, do you find yourself looking at that, or is it?
Well, I guess probably at the level that I usually get in on it, unless it's, you know, like if I'm making the Hunger Games and, you know, like there's a bunch of stuff already there, for example. Right. But the level that I get in on it, that usually comes probably later. And so I guess that I'm always looking for something that interests me, something that I think you know, getting back to the world creating thing, something that I can make a whole unit of, and then going from there. You know, like the mask, for example, on V, that was in the graphic novel, but I took that and I updated it. There were things that I wanted to do to, you know, make the character seem more human, you know, like, so I did things to the eyebrows and the eyes and the nose and that. And then, you know, I think that it depends what happens in your story. You know, like the story of the Matrix is basically how a doofus discovers that he's Jesus Christ, basically, right? Wow, Jesus Christ, wow, fantastic, right? Well, not exactly that, but you know, you get the idea, right? And so, you know, like Neo, the One, you know, like there's all little things that happen in the script writing, you know, Morpheus, you know, like there's all these coded messages. And so, you know, I think that you're always looking for stuff that can absolutely, you know, mark a place in the landscape that you're doing. So whenever you're looking to do things, I think, you know, to your point, you're always looking for those little things. And, you know, I'm probably looking at those at a script level or a backstory level, and then trying to create that brand within. So once the film gets released, those things are in there.
Right. So switching gears a little bit, you know, films have certainly influenced video games quite a bit. Do you think of any video games? I mean, it's such a different culture and a different medium, but I mean, I'm sure from the Hollywood side, everybody's looking at video games and saying, how can that influence what we do in film? Do you find that in your thinking? I know you're interested in the video game world, and maybe just sort of shed some light on why and what attracts you to that.
Well, you know, I don't think it's any surprise that, like, you know, games or gaming is much more forward-looking than Hollywood, is much more risk-taking than Hollywood, you know, like, and is actually probably a lot more popular than the Hollywood films, you know, in a lot of respects. And I think it's interesting that there hasn't been like a swathe of like great games to films. You know, I mean, they're still sort of, you know, trying, I guess. You know, like Tomb Raider is like probably, you know, one of the ones. Star Wars, I guess, is like a good one. But you know, I think, you know, if you could get some of that social impact that games have into your films, that would be like fantastic. Like if you could have a franchise like Call of Duty, like why wouldn't you, right?
Right.
But it just doesn't. It doesn't seem, the two have sort of seemed to have butted heads so far. But I think it's getting there. I mean, I think that, you know, I think it's also like a generational shift too. You know, I mean, I think like there's more understanding between the game community and the Hollywood community now, and now they don't see each other as mutual exclusives, which I think they did for a long time. And I think there's much more sort of cross-pollination, much more happening in the fabric between like the two. And I'm sure, you know, because there's some amazing games out there, and they deserve to be films. I mean, you know, like the amazing, you know, parts when you're playing a game that is the film content, that's usually when you've got the fast forward button on, right? You know, you're just trying to skip it. But I think you can, you know, parlay all that and put it into a film, and it'd be actually quite interesting if you could do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I agree with you. There's lots of games that we all play that have these very deep storylines, but oftentimes because we're not emotionally engaged in that storyline because it's not good enough.
Yeah.
It is not good enough as a film. We're trying to skip it, and we're frustrated when we can't.
Yeah.
You know, what do you think about interactive storytelling these days? I mean, do you find, I mean, games fulfill a lot of needs for fans, but you know, the storytelling is not always the first and foremost. And you know, we've seen Hollywood. It's gonna be a long question. We see Hollywood sometimes try to get into the games business and say, "I have a great idea," and they run into a wall because the games business usually isn't just looking for a narrative; they're looking for a lot more. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think what you ultimately have to do, the success to anything like that is, and why it usually doesn't work, is because they always completely miss the essence of what the game is, right? That's what I think. I mean, I think that there's no point in like just taking a storyline out of, let's just Call of Duty, or taking a storyline out of Tomb Raider, right? I think what you ultimately want to do is get the essence of what those games are to the fans of that game. And I think that that's the thing that Hollywood misses all the time, you know, and it seems like it would behoove them, I guess, to get someone who understood the whole world of the game, you know, I mean, that. And they would go like, if you're playing Call of Duty, what does it mean to you? And someone would give you like, you know, the high concept line of whatever that is. And then you should take that and try and make a film. You know, don't co-opt a Hollywood scriptwriter to try and get what he thinks is the essence of the game. I think the process is a little bit reversed engineered at the moment. It needs to like change a little bit. You know, it might be different if you got Aaron Sorkin or like someone who really...
J.J. Abrams.
Who really understands that kind of stuff. But at the moment, I think that's sort of where the seesaw kind of effect happens.
And I mean, for me, some of the best games, the story hides the game mechanic in such a beautiful way. Yeah. Games like BioShock, I'm sure lots of people in this room are looking forward to BioShock Infinite, or Half-Life 2, where the story is pulling you so deep into the game mechanic that it's almost invisible. You know, have you sort of taken a hand at any of the interactive storytelling? Is that something you're interested in at all?
Yeah, you know, I like games like Heavy Rain. I thought was kind of interesting. You know, I mean, I thought that was interesting. I did a film called Ninja Assassin, which borrowed from Assassin's Creed a little. So, you know, I was into that. And I mean, I think like, you know, they're two totally different games, by the way. But, you know, sometimes I think they serve different purposes. You know, like I think if you're playing Grand Theft Auto, you know, you want to shoot shit and smash shit up. And, you know, if you're playing Heavy Rain, you're like totally taking a different approach to where your head wants to be. And I think... or, you know, Uncharted, or, you know, whatever it is. I mean, I think it can satisfy both sides of your brain, but at the moment they're a little mutually exclusive, I think. Yeah.
Going back to the Matrix, there was, you know, the Animatrix series that came out was sort of groundbreaking as well, and sort of I mean, in my perception, maybe this is wrong, but the way I see it is that that was sort of the birth of original content to sort of companion stories to help push an IP well beyond what its core is. And so I'm just wondering, you've seen what Halo's done with Forward Unto Dawn. I mean, we've done some stuff with Resident Evil and Fear in the past where companion narrative is being put out there to create brand evangelists. Have you had any sort of
I think the
interest in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you, as a filmmaker, by default, that's what happens now. I mean, I think, that first Matrix stuff was really a lot of the first transmedia stuff. I mean, it was like, there was the game, there was the film, there was the anime, there was like the comic books.
It was all encompassing.
It was all encompassing. And their whole thing was, and it came from them. It wasn't like the studio was pushing them. They're like, hey, we want to do a game and we want to do this Animatrix thing and we want to do the. And they're, like, great. What else you got? Keep pumping it out the door. But yeah, I mean, I think that as much, it's like ties into the whole second viewing experience now too. I mean, I think I think that people just want more nowadays. I mean, at like some point, I'm sure, film houses will let you do things on your, on your device as you're watching the movie. I think like the day of you being in a cinema in the dark, not with your phone active, is very short, I'd have to say. And so I think whenever you're doing any property now, you're absolutely looking for ways that you can expand the universe of what you're doing. And I think if you're, going back to creating the world, if you're creating that world, you want to do all those things too. So I think the more content that you can do, the more people can get into the world that you're creating, the better, I'd have to say.
Yeah, I mean, the barriers of entry financially to do that have come so far down, both from reaching people from a distribution standpoint. You don't have to go buy the huge TV media buy, but also the cost of, you don't have to shoot on film stock anymore, has really allowed people to go out and make this amazing content to build this community. And it's really, we think at Eisenberg, certainly a big part of our future is supporting our IPs, not from just selling a product, but from wrapping everything you can around it and pulling people in however you can get them.
Yeah, and I think, I think you're absolutely right. The day of the 15-second, 30-second, commercial to pump your product out there is like gone. It's like out the door. I mean, the amazing thing with V for Vendetta is, it's almost like impossible to get that sort of saturation. I mean, like that is like a 1 in a million thing, but doesn't mean that you can't do it, because there's other things all the time that are happening that are that play in the same field as that. And I think it's just that is happening because people are trying different avenues. They're like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? What about this channel? Why don't we do it on this channel? Let's see how it works here. And I think that it's it's like the future. I think you're exactly right. It's like just about trying things.
And it all comes down to storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately.
No, I think it does. I mean, like, you have to, like, if a kid's in his bedroom and he's got like 5 devices going, right? He's got like his iPhone, he's got like his iPad, he's watching something on the TV, he's playing a game. He's not gonna like stay focused on what your film is if you don't have a story, or if your game doesn't have a story, or there's not something that's holding them in. So I would say, yes, it's the storytelling aspect is the thing that keeps people involved. And if you don't have that, then you don't have much, I'd have to say.